All right, we're going to give everybody a second to come into the room, just make sure everybody has time. If you can hear me, if you can throw a thumbs up, that's would be great. There we go. And you can see the notes up on the screen that says Educator Series, so we're all where we need to be. Awesome, awesome.
Eric, you've got a hand up. Can we take, is this format of Teams allow us to take folks' verbal requests or verbal questions?
We can turn their mics on when they put their hand up. If you just, I can open it now. Danny, we got you open. You can talk. Or maybe not. Oh, it looks like he put his hand down. Looks like Joe's having a good time.
He said it was an accidental hand raise in the chat.
Excellent, excellent. All right, well, I want to be sensitive to people's timing today. So why don't I start with a thank you for joining us today. My name's Eric Wellman. I'm the EMS manager here at Maine Health for the EMS division in the Maine Medical Center. I appreciate you joining us today. This is our first of many instructor type focused lectures that we're going to try to do over the next year. I'm also joined by some of my colleagues who will be participating with us. I have Don Sheets with us, I have Leah Mitchell, and I have Aiden Koplowski. All those names you may know as they're well-known educators throughout the state. This series stemmed out of a fact of just a kind of a quick winter gathering that we were able to have to catch up from years of not being able to get time to catch up with each other. And we decided that it was probably time for us to try to engage on getting some instructor training out there for the group. So that's where this series has come from. So everybody agreed to take a lecture, and I agreed to go first. And as we go through this, one of the things I want to show you is what we're going to be looking at for our goals. I'm going to start out with a lecture today, as you've all signed up for, that's focused on culture and leadership, and that's going to lead us into Dawn's credentialing of EMS coalitions lecture, and then we'll move on to Aiden's competency-based training programs, which will link into what we're talking about today a little bit, and then Leah's going to wrap us up for the year with a providing feedback lecture. That should give you some strong points for how to do this. We run this from the perspective of it's functionally an educator and leadership kind of discussion. So it's got roles for everybody. And one of the things you'll hear me talk about today is that an educator and a leader are functionally the same thing. So just so you have that concept for yourself. So I'd really like to thank you for coming. The success of this is obviously going to depend on input. So we are not stopping here. We do want to hear what your ideas are. If you have topics that you'd like us to talk about or tackle, or if you have interest in certain things, it would be great to hear from you. My email address is up there, and I'm sure you can email Dawn, you can email Leah, you can email Aiden, any of them. Matt will certainly take your emails also. And if there's a particular topic, a particular person, if there's somebody that you say, hey, I've really been interested in, I've heard this person talk, it'd be great to have them in there, just let us know. But also, we're also looking for people who might have things to share also. And so if you have a particular passion, a particular topic that you speak well about, or you've done some work on, please feel free to contact me, and we'll see about working you into the schedule and reviewing your materials so we can see if they help with the subject matter. And again, the goal here is to try to fill in some of those cracks with the not so always available instructor coordinator continuing education credits. So, do any of my colleagues have anything to add at this point for their materials, or do they want to all hide off camera and enjoy the show? Appreciate you all being here. All right, so why don't we get on with the program and the stuff that you're really here for today. So this is Built to Train, lessons from Admiral Arleigh Burke for designing high-performance EMS educational programs. So again, this was a talk that came out of a lot of reading and a lot of exposure to military history. And the fact that if you're not familiar, Admiral Burke does have a connection to Maine, which I'll talk about in a moment. I have no financial disclosures. I continue to seek them out at any time. So if you have them, please send them my way. My goal today is to talk about the history of Admiral Burke and link some of his strategies and his philosophies to education, and to how we can pull from those ideas and improve the strategies that we use to teach our fellow clinicians. But I really do want to stress this is just not an EMS talk in and of it by itself. It's a leadership talk. It is also useful for almost anything you do, including even your personal life is where it can be applied. So a couple personal disclosures. I am not a sailor. I did not serve in the Navy. I have not served in the uniformed military services. So everything I say is functionally a much more academic approach from reading and those types of things. I have been on large ships before. I have been out in the open sea. I am the son of a shipbuilder. My father worked at Bath Iron Works and did work on the Arleigh Burke class of cruiser destroyers. I am formally trained as an educator, and I've spent most of my life being an educator. So those are my kind of personal aspects of this and the areas that I have some real focus in. So why we're here today. So this is Admiral Arleigh Burke. He served in the United States Navy. He left his career as a 4-star admiral and served as the Chief of Naval Operations for 3 terms, which actually he holds the record for the longest consecutive terms for that. He had a very interesting background, which I'm going to get into and talk about. He has the distinguished background of actually changing what we call naval doctrine, which is functionally, when you talk about doctrine, it is how an organization functionally works. It is the goals and everything like that. And through much of what he did, he is the reason we do much of what we do today in the modern Navy and how we approach things. When I thought to do this talk, there was not a war going on at the time. And much of how we are addressing that is based on the philosophies and the doctrine of Admiral Burke. So as we go through this, I think you'll see some of the modern day trending. So this is the USS Arleigh Burke. It is the first of the Arleigh Burke destroyers that was made. The Navy has a process of whenever they build a new class of ship, they need the name that class of ship has becomes the class of ship. This was built in 1991 at Bath Iron Works. And as near as I can tell, I'm pretty sure my father worked on this ship at some point because he was there during that time as a crane rigger. So we build about 50% of the Arleigh Burke destroyers here in Maine at Bath Iron Works. That's their one of their primary ships that they build. So like I said, we have a close connection. So thank you to the shipbuilders in Bath for helping with this talk. So here's the first trivia question of the day. You can throw the answer in the chat. Does anybody know what ship that is? It is from the World War II time period. It is a battleship. But do you know which battleship this is? And I can tell you that its designation is BB-39. BB-39, Miles, good job. is an important ship. It is the USS Arizona. It was sunk during the attack on Pearl Harbor. Why it's here today is Arleigh Burke served on the USS Arizona in the early part of his career, and would have probably still been there come the Pearl Harbor incident if he hadn't transferred off for training reasons. So, but a little bit about our admiral for a bit. So he was born in Boulder, Colorado, which is well away from the ocean. Not a lot of ocean there in Colorado. He was born in 1901. So that ultimately tells you that when he graduated from high school was about the height of the influenza pandemic that was affecting the United States at that time. So when he left high school, he actually did not graduate from high school, but was accepted into the Naval Academy based on his performance in that. His family were farmers. They had immigrated from Sweden, and actually they changed their name to be more Americanized in that process. His mother actually was the reason he went on to the Naval Academy. His father actually wished that he had stayed at home and was going to run the family farm. So he did graduate in 1923 from the Naval Academy near the top of his class. He attributes most of that to a strong work ethic and self-discipline, which is very clear in his command style and very clear in the doctrine that he professes throughout most of his career. Interestingly enough, he also has an interesting twist in his background. So Admiral Burke is also a chemical engineer, which is not a commonplace during this time period. So officers that wanted to go on to be admirals and captains of ships and such of that did not necessarily focus so much on engineering and munitions. His specialty was munitions and the engineering of ordnance. So he spent time in the naval ordnance realm. He actually learned how to build all the guns and everything else that he has. And this actually runs with part of what his career path and leadership philosophy was. He knew his ships inside and out. And he knew everything about them. He knew every stress point that they had. He knew everything they could do. He also believed in the same thing for his crews. So he learned the stress points and everything else that he needed to know about how his crews worked, and this was part of his training philosophy. So during this time period, he spent a lot of time perfecting how ships worked, how he understood a ship to work, and worked his way up to the rank of captain of a destroyer squadron known as Destroyer Squadron 23, to also have the nickname of the Little Beavers. So during this time, he formulated a few leadership philosophies. Command depends on professional competence, not position. So the key point here is that no matter what rank, what position or anything else that you hold in an organization, and whether that be an EMS, the emergency room, the fire department, wherever it may be, we all have the option of being a leader, and we all have the option of gaining professional competency, learning our jobs to the best that we can, and doing that. Your training programs should probably reflect very similar aspects. We'll talk about that in a moment. Officers must understand technology deeply to employ it decisively in war. So if you don't understand the tools you're using, the resources that you have, those types of things, it won't really matter that you have them if you don't understand how they work. And I'll give you a great example here when we talk about his major naval battle that earned him his title. Finally, train your personnel so they don't need you to act. This was another concept that was developed during this time, is that if you have to be present for your troops or your employees or anyone else to do their job effectively, you've probably already failed at what you're supposed to be doing. People should be able to act independently. They shouldn't hesitate when they need to act, and they should know what ultimately the goal is for anything that they encounter. This is going to talk a little bit about how policy isn't always the best way to manage an employee. So first things first, this is the new version of the Little Beavers emblem. The other emblem was changed because it depicted an Indian figure in it. So to be more inclusive, they have changed this to this, and I chose to use the most current one. And I think it's a good thing to always talk about here is, so a couple of things that you should probably think about as we talk about this time period for Commander Burke. Captain Burke. The Navy was segregated at this time, so blacks were segregated out from whites. Women could not serve at sea. The environment was very male-centric, so much of what you'll read from this time period is very male-oriented. Additionally, the organization itself was very top-down. What the admiral said was the only thing that mattered. And that was a lot of how this organization worked at this time. After this event is when many of the changes that we see in the modern military began. So there's some really important things here. But the other thing I want you to remember is think about the technology that existed during this time period. So no cell phones. Radio systems were cumbersome, large. You had to have a radio operator in order to even use a radio because of the complexity of the systems. Radar had just come on the scene. And if you recall anything about the bombing of Pearl Harbor, they saw it coming on their radar scopes. They just didn't know it was coming. They actually calculated it as something else. And the same thing goes for this event. One of the things we're going to talk about is it was hard for radar operators to tell the difference between a cloud of mist and an actual destroyer. So that's something I want you to think about as we go over some of the things that they did. So during this time, Captain Burke was assigned to Destroyer Squadron 23. I told you their Little Beavers was their nickname. The captain earned himself a few titles during this time, which I'll explain where they came from. But 31 Knot Burke is one of his most famous names. We're going to talk definitively about the Battle of Cape St. George, which is the definitive battle that actually earned him much of the reason why we're talking about him today. But during this time, he talked a lot about his philosophy on decentralized decision-making, rehearsed initiative, and aggressive maneuver. So one of the things to understand about Captain Burke at this time is he was not a charismatic leader. Many officers were charismatic. They were good at people skills, those types of things. He was exceptionally good at technical skills, but where he really shined was in combat. He was probably one of the most aggressive destroyer captains out there. He was well known for strategic, calculated risk. He would constantly weigh every decision he made on that scale. He never would endanger his own men, but he would always make calculated decisions and push his crews and his equipment to the nearest point of failure that he could get them to in order to stay on target. He was also highly aggressive in combat. One of his biggest philosophies was that if I keep my enemy basically on constant guard, they don't know what to do with me. But he also believed that he should keep his crews well informed and make sure they knew exactly what he was going to do. So he was chaos to the enemy, but to his command and to his group, he was constantly predictable. And that's what made him so a strong leader in this case. We can do the same in our environments, as we'll learn. And in case you didn't know, the Little Beavers actually comes from the comic book, the Red Ryder comic book. And if you're a fan of A Christmas Story, you all know where that goes. So let's talk briefly about the battle that made Captain Burke the admiral that we know him today. The battle is the Battle of Cape St. George. Is at the end of the Solomon Islands campaign, and it is actually what probably changed the tide of war during World War II with the Japanese. If you're not familiar, the Solomon Islands are in the South Pacific. And when Admiral Halsey gave of the Third Fleet gave Captain Burke his orders, he was about 300 miles away. So if you look at that map, down in the right-hand corner was where he was, and up in the middle of the left-hand corner is where he's headed. That's 300 miles away. And when he was initially given his orders, naval intelligence believed that the Japanese fleet that they were looking for would be there. If you're not familiar with military intelligence, it's right some of the time, not all of the time, and getting people in the right place during this time frame. There is no GPS. There's no visibility at night. There's a ton of things. The Japanese were also exceptional night sailors. And this is something to keep in mind. Sailing is something during this time period that daytime operations were much safer than nighttime operations. The Japanese had mastered moving at night. It meant that they couldn't be seen. It meant that they were able to move without being detected. Our systems were much more daytime oriented. So this was going to be the first nighttime combat where destroyers would engage in the middle of the night in darkness. So the 31 knot title comes from, that was the fastest his slowest ship could move, and he pushed it to that limit. Now, if you don't understand what that means, is that when you move a ship that hard, that fast, is that ship's going to shake the entire time. When a ship shakes, a ship breaks. And when you look at materials like a radar unit, any of the technical materials that are in there, any of that vibration could be devastating to keeping that ship operational. This was one of the things that Burke worked with his teams on repeatedly was, can you keep it repaired? Can you keep it moving? But also, we need to move as fast as possible without breaking that. As they moved, they were looking for a group called the Tokyo Express. And what this Tokyo Express was a group of destroyers that were moving transport frigates that were carrying supplies for the Japanese Navy. And this was how the Japanese were able to take all of the islands between here and Hawaii, between Japan and Hawaii, and keep them well supplied and everything else. We had been unable to catch them and stop this process from occurring at this point. The Solomon Islands campaign was fairly brutal for the United States. And this was a kind of a turning point for everyone. So as I said earlier, radar had just come into play at this time. So the radar operators were not great at figuring out everything that was on the scope. So this maneuver that they were going to attempt was functionally a significantly calculated risk. So when they arrived to the area that they believed the Tokyo Express was in, Burke divided his 5 ships, the 5 destroyers in the squadron, into 2 divisions, 3 with him and 2 on their own. He ultimately decided that his group would lead the attack on the destroyers from the Japanese fleet, and he had trained all of his captains to act without being told. And this is an important concept here. So what they did in the dead of night is they waited for the ships to come into range, which again, they were relying on naval intelligence data to come into range. The radar operators believed they detected the ships. The 3 ships in the lead deployed torpedoes into the water and had basically used radar tracking. Now, today, anybody who's seen any television related to the military or any newscasting, that's pretty basic stuff now. That we do that without any effort. We have computers, GPS, we have a bunch of things to help us do that now. Then it was a lot of hoping and praying. The torpedoes went in the water and they had to wait. Now remember, they're in complete darkness, complete radio silence, and that is the only way to communicate between the ships effectively. They can use light signals, but as soon as they use a light signal, someone would detect them. So everyone basically was waiting in silence. The torpedoes went into the water, and then they waited for contacts. As soon as those torpedoes contacted the Japanese, all of the ships sprung into action. No orders were given. They all just went. They sank 3 Japanese destroyers almost immediately. And they basically neutralized the entire force. almost immediately. And then the 2nd Division came in and mopped up. And the Japanese never knew what hit them because they couldn't keep track of anything, because one of the initiatives here was that if you always keep your enemy on the toes, they can't figure out what's going on. And he used chaos and hard aggressive attacking to keep everybody going. So they ultimately, at this point, disabled that whole operation. An additional thing that happened here too was it was not uncommon in this war and at this time for sailors who were not on their ships anymore, or not that had been, their ships had been blown up, to be basically left for dead and or killed by the enemy ship. And in this time, Admiral Burke, or Captain Burke at the time, ordered that none of the Japanese sailors in the water be shot. So this was a kind of a big change of approach. But a couple things. So ultimately, this was a well-planned and well-orchestrated. They practiced these types of operations time and time and time again before this ever happened. So they rehearsed this event in every way. So every person on that ship knew exactly what their role was, knew exactly what they were supposed to do. They did not have to be told what to do, and they did not feel insecure about any of their decision-making processes as they went through this process. So these are key kind of educational components. They felt safe to act. They felt safe to do what they wanted to do. They felt their commander would support them 110% in the choices that they made. And again, when running these high risk maneuvers, it was essential that they have this level of confidence in themselves and in their own abilities to do this. This was also done under stress inoculation. So it is well written and well documented that their crews were constantly running. They talked about the amount of coffee that was used by these crews. They were constantly drinking coffee. They were constantly being stayed awake, but it was all to stress inoculate and teach them to do the things that they needed to do. So ultimately, this maneuver was able to, one, incapacitate the Japanese supply ships. It stopped the ability for the Japanese to supply any more of the Solomon Islands. It ended the Solomon Islands conflict within a day or two. And basically made it so the Japanese were almost ineffective at resupplying for the remainder of the war, which, if anybody knows anything about war, it's all about logistics, and they were interrupting the logistics. This did earn the squadron a presidential citation. They're the only destroyer squadron that received one during the entire war. That tells you how significant this action was. And not one person in the destroyer squadron was injured, and no ships were disabled or even, in fact, damaged in any way during the conflict, which, again, is highly impressive. So what we learned here is mission command at sea is essential in fluid high-speed warfare, because everyone had been well rehearsed, well trained, well supported. They were comfortable to do these high-risk things that were highly calculated, not high risk in the sense of they were taking reckless risks. They were taking extremely well mitigated risk. They were making all the right decisions, but they were also empowered to make decisions, because again, in an unfolding combat operation, there is no way to predict every aspect of everything. And we talk about this a lot in emergency medical services, the fire service, emergency medicine. You can't predict everything. You can't write a policy for everything. You can only hope that people make the right decisions presented with the evidence that they have. Finally, the other piece here is that staff planning supports battle, but command wins it. And what this is you can plan for a lot of stuff, but you still have to make the right command decisions at the time when a situation like this develops. And this goes into some of his bigger pieces about that as people who do training and people who do this, we have to be comfortable trusting the people that do what we want to do, and we have to make sure that they feel like they can make the decisions that are necessary to be made. So after World War II, our admiral moves on to ultimately becoming an admiral. He goes on to lead the Navy as the Chief Naval Officer, Chief of Naval Operations. He retires in 1961, which is kind of the midpoint. The Cold War is starting, is ramping up. Korea has ended, and he moves into, or Korea is close to ending. The Vietnam War hasn't quite started yet, and he is the principal architect of the naval doctrine of the Cold War itself. So if you're not familiar with what's on the slide there, that's a Polaris missile being deployed. Polaris missiles are submarine launched ballistic missiles. He was a firm supporter of the ballistic missile program, which ultimately can also carry nuclear arsenals if necessary. He helped get the nuclear submarine programs and other nuclear propulsion systems online for our aircraft carriers, our subs, and other ships. He integrated guided missile systems and jet aircraft. Now, many of this seems like, well, yeah, we see that all the time. I watch the news every night and I see all these ships. Yep. But this all started here for these reasons. And then ultimately, this was also the rise of the United States being a nuclear power and the Soviet Union also competing for that title. And that everybody thought, well, everybody has nuclear technology. No one's going to fight with each other, and we should focus all of our efforts on how that deterrent actually works. Admiral Burke had a different philosophy. He says conventional warfare will still be a regular part of what we do, even if it's just small skirmishes. And as we've seen over the years, we've seen that we've deployed the Navy throughout the world for various reasons, sometimes just to be a presence that makes us a deterrent. We perform many types of different missions, including missions of aid to various places. So it's because of his belief system in those types of things that we kept those initiatives going that made us a much more nimble Navy and allowed us to do that. So the question becomes is, why is all of that important to how we train, how we educate, and what we do? And one of his first and foremost philosophies was command, not staff. And he believed that authority and accountability must reside with commanders. So what this theory and philosophy is about is that commanders have to be able to make decisions, the people that lead. They have to be responsible for their decisions, and they have to take full accountability for their actions. And they have to be willing to, and they have to understand that that means that you have to train the people that are necessary in order for you to have that level of command. And the more you try to put processes around that, write policies around that, and continue to add layers and layers and layers of bureaucracy around that, the worse the decision making is going to get. And we can correlate this to it's interesting that local government is best is what some people say versus federalized government or farther away government, because it takes into account the local things. And this is functionally what he was talking about, is that a decision in a battle can only really be made at the level of the battle. And how that works for us. So in patient care, think about what it would be like. And this is functionally, for some of you in the audience, this may be how you started in EMS. Can you imagine calling a doctor every single time you encounter a patient and having to ask to do things like start an IV, give oxygen, instead of having a set of standard written protocols? And then on top of that, the protocol just isn't enough sometimes. We have to teach you certain things, and you have to be able to act in certain ways. And this is one of the struggles that we need to make sure that people understand, is that the more and more your people feel like they have to ask for permission to do something, and the more that they feel like they can't make decisions because that decision will either be overridden, that decision will be undermined, or that decision will bring them up on some form of charges. is going to make them less likely to make the right decision at the right time or when presented. So a lot of our training has to go around the idea of how do we empower the people at the front line to do the best job possible and not feel like they have to get permission to do everything they want. And in the modern era, we have moved into an era when the philosophy is I need to ask before I do. And that is a commonplace, that's a societal thing. That's not necessarily just focused in medicine or EMS or fire service or anything like that. That's how our children are learning, is that I have to ask first and then I can do. So these are things that we have to train into people because they're not getting that as part of their philosophy of life. Principle 2 was you will perform as you have trained, nothing more. I don't think this is new information for anyone. I think this is, if you've done any kind of education or leadership philosophy, we know that when you become stressed, you default to what your brain knows and what's stuck in your amygdala. And if you have, there's plenty of studies out there, there's plenty of research that shows you will do the most familiar thing to you in a stress point. Because one, it gives you comfort, and two, it's easy. It's in your brain, it's ingrained. So if you want people to do new things, you have to stress them out under training conditions, and you have to give them new strategies to use, and then you have to get them comfortable using them when they're stressed. So in the modern day and area, when training costs money and when training is expensive for some people, you have to find low cost ways to train people into constantly doing things over and over again so they inoculate themselves under stress. And again, this is why drilling has always been a process in many organizations that have to do high risk things. This is where some of Aiden's competency-based training pieces will come into play, and learning about how best to do these processes. Don's credentialing material will talk about why an organization should have a credentialing process that also includes a competency-based training process in order to make sure these things happen. Not putting you guys on the spot there or anything. Principle 3, loyalty up and down. This is also a naval principle. And in this concept is that as the commander, you need to stand up for anyone that's your subordinate, but as a subordinate, you need to stand up for your commander too. And it goes both ways. This is why training is important. The more you train together, the more you educate together, the more you work together, the more bonds that get built. So one of the things about Squadron 23 was that it was functionally an elite squadron within the Navy. People wanted to be there. They were proud of what they did. They were proud of the hard work they did. They were proud to be people on those ships. And it made them feel better about themselves. And this is what we call the cultural aspect of training and belonging. And when people feel like this, they actually work harder. They have a stronger bond to the situation. This is why people join gangs. It's that same piece that they feel like they belong. They are rewarded for their successes. They are rewarded with things that are sometimes not tangible. And culture always beats out money, with maybe some rare exceptions of insanely large amounts of money. But at the end of the day, people tend to come back to where culture is strong and that people feel like they're valued and they belong and that their opinions matter. But it also builds what's called psychological safety. I enjoy working in the organization I work in now because I feel like if I made a mistake, it would not immediately make me it would not be a terminating offense. In fact, it would probably be viewed more as, well, you did what you did, but you did it with the resources that you had, the information that you had. You did check the boxes. You did the things that you needed to do. It just didn't work out the way we wanted it to. Okay. That kind of organization does make you feel much more secure about trying new things and learning to do things. But if your organization works with the concept of the second you do something different than what the basic policy says that you're going to end up in somebody's office being screamed at, the likelihood that you're going to innovate, the likelihood that you're going to try anything new is exceptionally low. And that's an important key factor. If you want people to go to their top performing level, they have to feel like when they make a mistake, but they've made a mistake inadvertently, not with a malicious intent, that they're going to be supported by their leaders for that reason. And that's a lot of what Admiral Burke's philosophy is that leaders need to protect their troops and their sailors if they're doing the right things. They just had a negative outcome from doing the right thing. And I think we're all supportive of that concept. Finally, the warfighting piece doesn't necessarily work for this slide for us, but we'll go with it. Technology in service to warfighting. And for us, it's going to be in education or clinical medicine or whatever it is for you specifically in that thing. But people do need to understand how their technologies work. So whether it be how the SpO2 monitor actually works, how the cardiac monitor works, whether it be how the pump in your engine works, whatever it may be, you need to have a good technical understanding of how that is. Because the other side of it too is you can't just rely on the technology blindly. And that's what the premise is here. So if you have no idea how an SpO2 monitor actually works and what its limitations are and why it can't do certain things or why it may give you a result when a certain physiology is occurring, you're already behind the 8 ball. And the O2 sat, well, it gives you a number and that number might be that. You have to have the knowledge, education, and training underneath it to make those devices work for you in a way that is beneficial. And more often than not, we give technology to people without a deep understanding of what the technology is. Now, I am not saying that you need to know the intricate electrical workings of a cardiac monitor and how the grounding works and those kind of things. That's not where I'm going with this, but you do need to understand the limitations of the technologies that you have and what technologies may benefit you. Especially in an age where artificial intelligence is coming more and more into our daily lives and our healthcare realm, our firefighting realm, our various other areas that we serve in. We need to have a better understanding of how those technologies serve us and how they're going to benefit our patient care realm. Those are important realms. But these were 4 principles that, one, much of what we talked about for its history now demonstrate as being exceptionally important in understanding a training program. These are the 4 major parts there. So we can link those into a blueprint. And what that is the first thing that if you're going to build an effective culture of training for your organization is you kind of have to define your command intent. And when I say define your command intent, what is your plan? What is your goal? What do you want to do? What do you want people to do? This is a hard decision for people who are in leadership positions because one of the things that it's a kind of a two-way street thing, but it's harder for the leader. You have to be able to trust everybody in your organization. And to build trust, you have to spend time with them. You have to train with them. And again, if your organization has multiple layers, yes, the person at the top of the pyramid isn't always going to interact with people at the very bottom of the pyramid. But the person at the top does have to interact with layers below them in order to make sure that everyone's running the materials the way it is. And just like the people at the bottom have to understand they have very specific roles inside the organization, and they have to be experts at their roles first before they worry about the roles of other people in other places in the organization. And that's a lot of what needs to be discussed at a level. And you do need to involve all the levels, because any program that starts from the top and works its way down, and also any program that works only from the bottom up, doesn't always work the way everybody wants it to. And having input from all of those levels is essential for getting a plan in place that can give you those structures. So again, define what you're trying to do. This is have written standards. This is think about what kind of training people need to have in order to do the job. And then once you've done that, you need to train people, but you can't just train people to do specific, like I'm going to give you, and Jack, I'm going to apologize right now. I'm going to give you a checklist, and that checklist is the only thing you need to know how to do. The checklist is not the training. The checklist is the thing that you use after you've been fully trained in something to have a remembering thing. So when you haven't done something for a period of time, that you have a quick guide to do it. Because if you can't fill in all the holes for the checklist, you can't have that. Thanks, Jack. Love you too. So we do need to go deeper into our training for many of the things we do. Much of what we're seeing these days is that people are getting kind of a tertiary training. Like they're getting hey, the protocol says this, great, but why does the protocol say that? Why did the MDPB pick these things to go this way? What do we need to understand about that? Do we understand the pathophysiology of that? Do we understand the anatomy and physiology attached to it? Are we making sure that people have those levels of training in order to make sure that is? And again, you can say, well, they went to paramedic school, they went to EMT school. Well, that's great, but do you remember everything you learned in EMT class or learned in paramedic class 5, 10, 15 years later? The only reason I remember any of the stuff I learned in paramedic school is because I taught it for 20 years. And that reinforced it for me. So it's thinking about those factors and how do you better equip your personnel for this. And again, some of this training doesn't need to be complex. It just may need to be repetitive, and it may need to be done over and over again in order to reinforce some of that. And think about it is when you think about intubating a patient, the act of intubation probably is not the hardest part of intubation. The decision-making that goes into intubating someone is difficult. The preparing the person to be intubated, that is difficult. Making sure that they're getting resuscitated before you try to intubate them. Making sure that you have the personnel necessary in order to successfully do this. Getting them positioned and ramped and aligned so you can actually perform the intubation without difficulty. Making sure you have the equipment you need. There is a ton of prep work that needs to be done here in order for that to happen. And then it's not just placing the tube, but it's making sure that tube doesn't go anywhere. Securing it well, making sure it was in the right place in the first place, confirming it with end-tidal CO2, and then having a process where you practice regularly. What do I do every time I move the patient? I need to reassess them and make sure that this hasn't happened. But that doesn't happen unless you constantly are doing it. So you need to have a way to ensure that those concepts are occurring for people as they go. Additionally, our next phase is to develop our educators as our leaders. Honestly, one of the best things you can do is create a culture that everybody who does lead does educate. Link those two things together. Do not make them mutually exclusive events. Make them a part of people's roles and hire for that and promote with that. And if this person isn't good at explaining things to people or leading them in a teaching mode or being able to do those things, you have to ask yourself, well, why are they a good leader? What makes them good leaders if they can't bring the entire organization to a stronger growth point? So those are things that you want to think about as you start to develop that. But we also need to develop educators. So they don't just grow on trees. For years, I'm sure Don would agree with me that Don, is there a huge surplus of educators running around and that do quality teaching in EMS right now?
I would say we have an opportunity for improvement.
Spoken like a true law student. Yeah. And I think that's an important piece. We have to develop the people that are going to do this, and we develop them in many ways: field training, and becoming field trainers, doing the people that help with your training programs and getting them up to speed. The other thing that we also want to make sure that we talk a lot about is decision-making process. People need to learn decision-making processes. And if they don't understand the decisions they're making, they're just more likely a skill monkey than a person who actually knows what they're doing. And you have to have that built into your training programs. And finally, the last thing you have to think about is what's your culture. So we know in the modern day of EMS that during COVID, we saw a lot of people come into EMS and then a lot of people leave at the same time. And then we saw the tap go down for a little while because we couldn't get enough people into EMS. And the back door has still been widely open. We brought up pay rates overall in the system, but we still see people leaving our systems. The question that we have to ask ourselves, are our cultures driving people out the door? Are our cultures welcoming to people? Do people feel secure within our organization? Do they feel like they're comfortable doing their jobs? One of my roles here is quality assurance. I talk to a lot of people about things that had some outcomes that weren't so positive, and get a chance to interact with a lot of people and have a lot of good conversations. And there's a common theme a lot of times that they either hadn't done the skill in a while, they never really understood the skill in the first place, they didn't understand any of the background data that goes into those skills, or they just didn't feel like they could ask anybody in their organization to help them because they had been kind of, told, well, you need to figure it out. You're this, you're that. So take a look at your culture and see if your culture is allowing for people to, one, I want to learn more. Can someone talk to me about stuff? Is everybody in your organization willing to help other people to learn more so that they do their jobs better? Are they supporting them well? So that's your kind of blueprint to get to where you want. And we're going to close with a quote from the Admiral himself. Leadership is understanding people and involving them to help you do a job. That takes all of the good characteristics like integrity, dedication of purpose, selflessness, knowledge, skill, implicability, as well as determination not to accept failure. So the goal here is to remember, as a leader, you have to rely on people, and people have to rely on you. They're not mutually exclusive. They are symbiotic. And you need to have not just technical knowledge, you need to be able to understand how to make people feel like they're part of the organization, but also make them feel supported inside the organization and make them feel like they're part of something. And the more you focus on those aspects, the more you will get from the people that you work with. So I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me talk about one of my favorite things. I hope I didn't fanboy too much. I am really a fan of Admiral Burke, and much of what he's done. But I'll take this time. If people have questions, you can throw a hand up. You can throw stuff in the chat. I'm glad to see what I can do to answer those questions for you. Yeah. Thanks, Pat. Appreciate that. And I would like to just shout out to the members here that have been in the U.S. military. Thank you for your service, and thank you for the great things you've done. Dawn, when's your presentation? June?
It will be in June, yeah.
So Dawn will be up next for us. I do appreciate you taking the time. I hope it was at least worth an hour of your time, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next one. Well, I like that, Sun Tzu.